Hello everyone, this is your host, Carrie Logan, and welcome to Master the Upper Rooms. Today, I want to discuss a topic I have discovered over the years that has destroyed thousands and maybe millions of lives since humans have existed. In the past, I fell victim to this same vindictive game and weapon because it almost destroyed my life and career. The topic is reactive abuse. Why this topic is important to me is a family member fell for this toxic game, and now his whole world is upside down. He is ashamed and regretful because it happened in his church parking lot. When he snapped, his wife, now ex-wife, took out her cell phone, recorded the whole breakdown, and then called the police. This man is the kindest, gentlest, and most compassionate person. We all know that she was toxic and had been baiting him for weeks. My heart goes out to this man and anyone who has ever experienced reactive abuse and was in the dark. I want nobody to get hurt or spend time in jail because trust me, my abuser tried numerous times to bait and provoke me again. He begged me to hit him. He thought it was funny when he knew I was boiling inside, and I would not give him the pleasure of letting him win. And it's about winning because you snapped. So I kept quiet, did my best to avoid eye contact, left the room, or took my kids for a ride in the car. I did anything and everything to distance myself from him. Therefore, I will unpack this topic today to protect you and those you love. This information comes from a presentation I created in 2023. What is reactive abuse? Reactive abuse occurs when the victim reacts to the abuse they are experiencing. At times, the abuse can be physical, verbal, and emotional. And let's not forget psychological. Mutual abuse is when both partners are equally abusive to one another. We see siblings and young children mutually calling each other names to trigger a reaction so the other will snap. The victim snaps and reacts to the abuse. Some people might scream, toss out insults, or even lash out physically at the abuser. The abuser then retaliates by telling the victim that they are, in fact, the abuser. This is a form of gaslighting. Many survivors often ask themselves if they were abusive because of how they reacted. The truth is that mutual abuse is infrequent, and many experts don't believe it exists, but it does. If you have kids, you know it does. Furthermore, the power and control dynamics involved in domestic violence would make it nearly impossible for both partners to be abusive. The key word here is react. That's the difference between reactive abuse and mutual abuse. Victims and survivors react to the abuse of being pushed over the edge by the abuser. What happens to your brain? When someone is using reactive abuse against a person to make them snap, the person first must realize that they are playing a dangerous game with them. The abuser anticipates that the person will react by snapping instead of rationally responding. Before the person snaps, they can still access their cortex brain. Note, the cortex brain is not fully developed until someone is 25 years of age. This part of your brain supports us in empathy, creativity, rational thinking, problem solving, solution-oriented values, and the ability to control ourselves. When a person snaps, they shift into their limbic survival brain. Some call it your lizard brain, and respond by going into flight, fighting, freezing, or fawning. When we snap, we lose our composure and sense of self. There is no rationalization at this point. So what happens to the body? Here's what happens to the body within the victim. When a person is continuously abused, a high amount of cortisol and adrenaline is produced in the body. These stress hormones lead the person to the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze response. A fight response will make the person react by swearing, yelling, name-calling, making verbal threats, or physically lashing out. When this happens, the person can and will appear to be unstable, emotionally charged, aggressive, and out of control. However, underneath all those heated emotions and the stress hormone overload, they are reacting to the abuse. The term reactive abuse rather than mutual abuse best describes what is happening in this crazy-making scenario. Now, the abuser is most likely not filled with the same stress hormones, and that is why they can appear calm, stable, and sympathetic. This is key for law enforcement. And I Googled, how long does it take the stress hormone to leave the body? I discovered cortisol levels increased systemically about 15 minutes after the onset of stress and remained elevated for several hours. Fortunately, law enforcement cannot do a cortisol or adrenaline test, but awareness of the signs can help during the investigation. So what are the signs of high cortisol levels? Fast weight gain, especially an increase in belly fat. Fatigue that continues despite sleep. Acne and other skin issues. High blood pressure. Easily bruising. Mood changes. Muscle weakness. Brain fog and difficulty concentrating. Insomnia. Reactive abuse is a sign of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Any parent with a newborn will tell you that it's not easy the first few months after giving birth. Lack of sleep, mommy brain, and being exhausted for days and weeks can weaken your composure. Like PTSD, you can have similar symptoms that include intrusive thoughts, repetitive yelling when tired or frustrated, moments of anger, frustration, fear, paranoia, insomnia, and sleep disturbances. Abuse tactics. One of the most common tactics abusers use is to shift blame from the abuse onto the victim. The abuser will claim the victim is the abuser because of the victim's reaction. The abuser may even attempt to convince the victim that there is nothing worth reacting to and that the victim is overreacting to the abuse. That's gaslighting. What the victim is experiencing is called reactive abuse. Why do abusers rely on this tactic? Abusers rely on this reactive abuse because it is their, quote, proof that the victim is unstable and mentally ill. The abuser will hold these reactions against the victim indefinitely. It's called a narcissistic dog whistle. And it could be years later, and the abuser will either rub it in your face that you snapped or give you a gift to remind you of what happened. For me, it was a lint roller brush. Sometimes abusers use this reaction as an excuse to go to the police, have the victim arrested, even file for a protective order of their own against the victim. They could take away your kids, ruin your job. The list is endless. The manipulation game. To manipulate and unfairly influence a situation and gain power or control over the victim. That's their whole end game. When an abuser claims they are being abused, they manipulate people into believing they are 100% at fault for the abuse. The abusers are conditioning and influencing people to accept their blame. The longer this blame shifting repeats itself. Eventually, people will believe they are to blame for the reactive outbursts and abuse the abuser is handing out. The victim will struggle with cognitive dissonance. Then they will begin to believe they are unstable, damaged, violent, and abusive. The victim will eventually experience identity erosion, the shame spiral. This manipulation tactic even goes so far as to cause a person to feel shame. When a person reacts, it causes the abuser to claim they are the abusive one. These reactions also add a second element by causing someone to feel bad about themselves, so they feel guilt and shame. Like most people, we act against what we know to be true about ourselves. We all want to believe we are good, kind, capable, and loving people. We don't want to think that we are abusive. Our sense of self disappears when we repeatedly experience guilt and shame from an abuser. For the abuser to control another person, the guilt and shame will continue. It is a form of grooming and conditioning the victim into feeling bad about themselves on a regular basis. This is also another form of gaslighting. This form of abuse can and will impact the victim's life forever regarding employment or any place that does a background check, like if they get arrested because of it. And if it affects one's life dramatically, they can develop secondary or temporary narcissism. Without therapy or support, this person can end up isolating themselves from the world and in a constant state of victim mentality. So what is direct and indirect verbal reactive abuse? Everyone will encounter someone who will use direct or indirect verbal reactive abuse tactics. We have seen siblings use this abuse tactic on one another during an argument. In my lifetime, I've experienced both direct and the indirect approaches. Direct verbal reactive abuse is in your face and blunt. The abuser can be gaslighting you, playing the blame game, insulting, smearing, threatening, bullying, daring you to do something, manipulating, or trying to show dominance over you. Indirect verbal reactive abuse is where the person is talking about you but not saying your name. The abuser knows you are in the same room and within listening distance. They can still use the same manipulation tactics mentioned in direct verbal reactive abuse. How one responds and reacts to this form of reactive verbal abuse can significantly impact one's life. For example, you see young kids and adults pushed or dared to do something bizarre on social media platforms and later regret those life choices. We have heard stories of how someone narcissistic can flip the abuse script so the victim appears to be the abuser, confusing law enforcement, friends, family, and the victim. However, we cannot change our past. The endgame technique can spare anyone from being pushed over the edge. And I know right now that on Netflix, they have that whole series about American murderer Gabby Petito. And it explores the events surrounding her tragic death. And honestly, if you watch that, you watch the body cam and stuff, she was baited. She completely snapped. She lost it. He was calm. He played the victim. And she was crying and bawling. And let's not forget Johnny Depp. His ex-wife, what she did with her cell phone and how she made him snap and recorded the whole thing and tried to use against him in court. So this is just an example of reactive abuse. that people can actually watch and maybe relate. So let's move on. Education. First, I do wish more law enforcement, school staff and principals, therapists, social workers, parents, and attorneys, even judges, were educated on this subject. Too many victims get blamed for being pushed over the edge and losing their composure. Let me explain. Don't hit a woman. Before I explain, I must give a trigger warning. Some women might not like what I'm about to say, and others will get it. Men are raised not to hit a woman. Unfortunately, some women take advantage of this critical life lesson and like to push boundaries. A narcissistic woman or woman who favors reactive abuse tactics will bait and provoke a man or woman into hitting them. The woman might slap the person first in the face to trigger a reaction. She might continue to slap or punch the person, anticipating that eventually they will put their arm up to block the assault. Then the woman will react in shock if you defend yourself. It could be challenging to walk away from someone who is physically hurting you. Some women might pretend that you made them lose their balance and they fell. Some might inflict self-injury upon themselves and blame the victim. This results in, quote, proof, and an injury can then be blamed on the other person as being the abuser. Reactive consequences. Again, this is reactive abuse, not mutual abuse. Some women will egg the person on, taunt them into violence, and some women get off on being hit, abused, or having rough sex. This concerns me because people can find themselves in a difficult situation to explain or get out of. Their life and future are on the line. Some people can be blamed for a crime when they were just trying to protect themselves. There can be jail time, loss of child custody, supervised custody visitation, expensive legal fees, and layers of trauma upon trauma. Is it worth being pushed over the edge and paying the price that could alter your life forever? Of course the answer is no. Many people are not educated and informed about reactive abuse versus mutual abuse, especially people we count to keep us safe. That's how it goes undetected and leaves the victims destroyed. The end game technique. I learned the hard way, and I want to advise people so nobody will experience what I did. I could have lost custody of my children, my job as a therapist, and my private practice. I never expected to be in that situation, but I did. I had to create a safety net for myself, my children, my career, my life. There were numerous times my abuser begged me to hit him and wanted me to snap, but I refused. The end game technique was my life vest. So here we go. Step 1, understanding the end game technique. When someone is using reactive abuse against you to make you snap, you first must realize they are playing a dangerous game with you. They anticipate that you will react by snapping instead of rationally responding. Before you snap, you can still access your cortex brain. All right, that's the most important thing to realize is all your rational thinking, controlling yourself, empathy, staying calm is in that rational brain, okay? And you want to be there, all right? You don't want to go down into survival. Step 2, create distance. When someone is being pushed over the brink of no return, creating distance from your abuser is essential. One does not have to explain themselves when one changes the subject, walks into another room, excuses themselves to the bathroom, or comes up with an excuse to distance themselves from reactive abuse. Creating distance keeps you safe. Step 3, grounding technique. Use this grounding technique to calm yourself down quickly, to think more clearly. It can be your life vest. Place one hand on your forehead and the other on the back of your neck. Sit down and close your eyes. Next, connect to your body and focus on taking slow, steady, rhythmic breaths. Take 10 breaths and make each breath the same smooth, slow, and consistent pattern. This calming technique is essential and can help a person make rational, solution-oriented decisions to keep your sanity. Step 4. Evaluate the situation if you can escape to a safe space or room. If you snap or give in, would your life, ever be the same again? Would your children's lives change? And if so, how? Would that person, the abuser, get custody and you lose custody of your kids? You got to think about that. Would your career be altered forever? Could you be arrested, put in jail, lose custody of your children, end up in court, be publicly humiliated or smeared, or lose your job or position within the company or even community? Like that guy can't go to his church anymore. He has so much shame. Would this person flip the script and have you take the fall if someone got into trouble? Would the abuser inflict self-injury upon themselves and blame you for it? Review the conversation. It is like you are playing the what if and how game, trying to foresee any loopholes, traps, or pitfalls that the abuser is using against you. Step 5, and this is the last step, be the bigger person. This is a game, and the abuser wants to win. It is easy to take the low road and snap. Being a bigger person takes courage, strength, self-respect, and resilience. That's all 4D human consciousness, because this abuser is stuck in 3D. All right? And at times, not responding is the best move. Other times, a person can give the abuser a win. The victim might need to play the stupid card, and you're not stupid, and agree with the abuser, knowing they are not stupid, just keeping themselves safe. The victim can decide that they made a mistake to get the abuser off their back. This can give them time to seek additional help or hide. Hide a cheap pay-as-you-go emergency phone and text for help. And in the meantime, a person can research and construct a safety or exit plan to avoid being unprepared in the future. There are domestic violence agencies out there that will support you in keeping everyone safe. The end game is about viewing all your options and having the ability to respond safely without additional physical or verbal injury. Remember that you are making rational decisions and choices instead of irrational ones. So a quick recap. Step 1 is becoming self-aware of the type of reactive verbal abuse. Are you being manipulated, bullied, humiliated, smeared, controlled, baited, pushed into a corner? How does your abuser anticipate you will react instead of responding? Number 2, creating distance and safety. Number 3, calm down and stay focused. This is not about you. It's about your abuser trying to control, manipulate, and have power over you. And step 4 is explore all rational options available to keep everyone safe. Then play the end game. Out in your mind and in imagination, what could you do? Visualize what steps you need to do to maybe stay safe and keep everyone safe. And step 5 is do not take the bait and snap. Act in a way that avoids conflict or has your abuser escalate the situation. So I hope everyone has enjoyed this very serious episode, but it happens. It's probably happening to someone right now, somewhere on this world, and that person is in the dark, and it could ruin their whole life forever. And I don't want that to happen to anyone. You know someone that's in this situation? Share this podcast. Share this information with someone else. You're giving them a gift, okay? Share it, like it. It's important stuff, okay? Everyone, take care. Have a blessed day.